And the first thing I'd like us to do, if you don't mind, is just to imagine that we are slaves, okay? And we're slaves, and we live on a plantation just outside of Greenwood, Mississippi. And it's 1855, and it's a cold, early November morning, and we're waking up before the sun shines. A loud bell would go off. It was a way of just kind of letting the slaves know it's time to get up in the morning. The bell, and if it wasn't a bell, it'd be, someone would be roaming around telling everybody to basically get up. As you open your eyes in the morning, basically, you're going to look around just the crudeness of the place that you live in. The houses the slaves lived in, generally speaking, were no more than a couple hundred square feet, usually made out of logs, kind of like log cabins, but a little bit more sophisticated than that, just trim the logs off, daubed in between the logs with chinked in there with clay and straw and stuff like that to kind of get some kind of a seal. A couple windows, probably, a door, that's about it. You look around to look at the furniture, just a few crude pieces of furniture, a table, a bench, maybe a chair that you've been able to scrounge, a few pots and pans, a couple tin plates, or tin plates enough for the members of the family. As you roll out of bed, just to give you a sense of what your bed was just a cotton tick that was filled with straw or corn husk or something like that. So it's going to make a lot of noise as you roll around. And, periodically that would become infested, of course, and you have to move. I guess you could just take it out and burn it or something like that and replace that, but nothing necessarily comfort. The mattress would either be on the dirt floor, and the floors were usually dirt, there's not much below you but that. If you were lucky, you had yourself a bedstead, and the bedsteads were just, looked like a bed, and then there were ropes that were tied between the pieces of wood, essentially. That's where the whole sleep tight comes from. They used to have tighteners, and that'd be a fancy one if you had a tightener, otherwise the ropes would just begin to sag, and pretty much I'm sure that's the kind of bed that the slaves would have. As you got up, of course, you'd want to pull on your clothing, and the clothing that you would wear was this kind of rough, fairly thick material. The slaves would call it Orsenberg, and I'm never quite exact. I looked that up, and Orsenberg is a German style of textile, but it was a thick kind of clothing that they would have, given 2 suits over the course of the year, and they would be given these suits as their present at Christmas. It's the clothing that it's the essential compensation of slavery. You have to keep these people alive and give them something, essentially. But just a rough kind of, generally white, of course, in the very beginning, but I'm sure they turned to a ghosty gray relatively quickly from use, abuse, multiple washings, 2 pairs of those, but you'd pull that on. It's interesting when I was thinking about, pulling on the clothes, I can only see it as a man doing this, pulling on my trousers, on my shirt or something like that, of course. Women, of course, would have to have their own clothes. For some reason, I wasn't imagining what it was like to dress as a woman, which is ironic because I've done that in my contemporary situation. Even thought about the high heels I would wear with it. Just kidding, I wouldn't do that kind of stuff. But anyway, women, a simple dress, a smock on the front or apron on the front that they would wear. The kids would just wear shirt tails. They just had shirt tails, essentially. The children primarily just went barefoot. And, you'd have 1 pair of shoes per year, and often wooden-soled shoes. And right there, you kind of feel the potential difficulty of a wooden-soled shoe. And you generally wouldn't wear them if you didn't have to. So if it's warm or whatever, you're probably not going to use that. If you're not going to go to someplace rough, you're just going to go barefoot, essentially. But just pulling on these clothing. The slaves were given essentially what you would call a uniform. So you would wear a uniform because, the uniformity of just the distribution of clothing. You're going to buy a whole bunch of people clothing. You're not going to make all kind of style here. One thing I think is very interesting is that the slaves, they wanted to make the way they looked at individualistic. They wanted to express themselves to whatever way they could. So they found whatever hand-me-downs they could that were on the plantation, anything that was a discard, anything that was colorful, and they would, put that onto their body in whatever way. And the white people called them outlandish in what they would look like. They'd come out looking just with some kind of strange concoction around their hair or whatever. And for them, it was style, and whatever the style, what else kind of style could they have? But that they could sort of imagine and they could create with a hand-me-down. So they did actually have, they could create a look for themselves in their own particular way and deal with their hair and those types of things. As we get up, of course, in the morning, I don't know about you, but the first thing I got to do is go to the bathroom. And of course, you could use it there. There's just a bucket in the house for the so-called night soil. We could do that if we wanted to. For whatever reason, this morning I don't feel like doing that, so I'm going to walk outside and I'm going to go to the privy. There would be privies on the plantation in the slave quarter areas. By the way, the average slave lived on a plantation of 50 slaves, so you lived in these communities. And in many ways, that's kind of a good thing. There's no one I feel more sorry for than the slave who had to live by themselves with a white family. That would seem like an awful kind of situation. At least you could have some kind of community. But they would have privies, and you can imagine, these are just public outhouses, right, for large numbers of people. That can't be a pleasant experience for anyone, and yet that was the sort sort of way that you had to deal with yourself. As I'm walking to the privy, and I'm just going to use my little trip through the plantation, to tell us what it's like in the world that we live in, you're probably going to hear coughing and hacking and, people that are sick or something like that, a powerful indication of the relative poor health of slaves. Slaves were not healthy people generally. And it was one part nutritional, it was one part just exposure, one part an era of poor problematic medicine or medical ignorance. Those are all component parts of the whole thing. And, slaves were endlessly getting colds and flus and diarrhea and sometimes more serious things, hookworm, tuberculosis, epidemics would go through the plantations, often of course wreak havoc in their own particular way. All these things, of course, detrimental to the relative well-being of the slaves. It's a difficult existence they would have. The large plantations would sometimes have access to doctors. They would come there, of course, and they would do what they could. But this is a time when you don't even want a doctor. It's a time of medicine where doctors are more likely to kill you, of course, than to save you. You want to stay away from it if you possibly can. It's the age of purgation in terms of medicine. They thought your body had these balance of humors, and the way you solve someone's sickness, of course, was to balance those humors. And one way to do that was to bleed them. It creates this image in my mind of what it's like to go to the doctor in those days. You go to the doctor when you're sick, and of course the first thing they do is they want to bleed you. And then you get sicker and they want to bleed you more. And then you get really sick and they want to bleed the crap out of you. And then you die and they say, damn, we didn't bleed them enough. It's a sort of ridiculousness to the whole kind of thing. Doctors were there, of course, but not necessarily going to provide. And the slaves actually wanted to avoid the doctor. The doctor was like the angel of death, come to do damage to you. And instead turn to their own healers and to their own medicines, herbal medicines, and all these different things they put together. I can never quite remember the list. Whorehound and whiskey for childbirth or something. Whiskey's probably going to be good for a lot of things that ail you, right? The one I always remember was watermelon seed for to grabble into kidney. I guess they thought that would be good for kidney stones or something like that. But anyway, ill health was a constant problem, of course, as far as the slaves. And the slaves generally lived relatively short lives. Life expectancy probably around 36 years of age, perhaps even less than that on certain plantations. It sounds terrible, 36 years of age. I'd be long gone. I'm 55 years old. But you have to realize that, in national life expectancy is probably about 40, 44 years of age. So nobody's living necessarily terribly long. Slaves that were 60 years or older, very uncommon, a small percentage of the population. And by the way, when slaves became too old and superannuated, oftentimes, sometimes they were often cared for. I'm not going to say they weren't, but sometimes, the planter would have a cabin way off on the edge of the plantation. You take the really old, decrepit slave there and just let whatever happens, essentially. They weren't necessarily going to be of any use to anyone in a particular way. I'd like to imagine on this morning as we're walking down to the privy, we see a white man walking out of one of the quarters doing the walk of shame, basically, okay? And it's a suggestion, of course, an essential reality of slavery. And that was that there always was a pall over all of slavery, this situation of sexual abuse. It's just that it was the nature of the game. Anytime that white men owned black women, there's a potential for a problem there. And the reality was, there were sexual moments that were, you could say, consensual. But my notion is that, if you own someone and you tell that you won't ask them for sex one way or the other, it's extraordinarily hard for them to decline you, right? Consensual or not, it still becomes a manifestation of rape. And, hopefully not all moments were violent, but many of them were violent. But, this was part of the component. As a man, of course, if I'm a male slave, I'm walking through the plantation and I'm thinking about my wife and my daughter and my mother and other women that I know and how they would be consistently victimized by white men in a variety of different fashions. It was just part of the existence of slavery that you had to deal with. Almost every African American has European ancestry, almost every single one of them. And they've done, some of these interesting DNA analyses recent for individuals, celebrities and others, and they sometimes find out that they are majority European. It's sort of shocking to their system to some degree. They're more European in terms of their, who the hell cares, right? It's a cultural kind of issue. But anyway, this is the essential reality that slaves had to deal with. As I walk over to the privy, I'm going to look at one more thing that would just give me an indication of the nature of slavery. Sometimes there were these frameworks and sometimes stocks that were part of the area near the slave quarters. And it was a primary example that there was always the threat of violence in slavery. It was a coercive labor system. People aren't doing this because they want to. There is no compensation, any kind of positive compensation, any particular kind of way. So the way that you make, it's the way you make a lot of things. Animals, you you have to force them to do them, essentially. And slaves were forced to do these things. And of course, it didn't mean that there was always going to be violence perpetrated upon them, but the threat was always there, and the reality was potentially there. As I'm walking to the privy, I might see the overseer getting ready for the day. This was the white individual who was hired to watch over the slaves, to make sure that they were doing what they're supposed to do, to make sure that they weren't running away. Perhaps in that moment, he's preparing his whip for the day. I don't know. There's an imagery that we might have them of the bullwhip or something like that. I doubt that they would use that very often. Maybe they would. That'd be something that if you're out in the field, more of a threat than an actual. It's a very cumbersome and difficult thing to use. More likely, they just had lashes and what you might call starters, pieces of quartz and pieces of short wood that you would use to kind of rack somebody, to get them to do what they were supposed to do. And if you're out there in the field and you're not doing it, you might feel the little flicker of that on your back after the warning had come down or something like that. If you did something more heinous, at least in the eyes, of course, of the plantation owner, you could be put upon a rack or tied to a tree. You're stripped, at least of your shirt, and of course, whipped to whatever degree. We see pictures, of course, of slaves with just this extraordinary kind of X scarring on their backs, of lashes that had gone this way and lashes that had gone that way, that led strips of skin, that come off, and of course, in the moment, you can just imagine the blood, and you can imagine the pain of the individual and being scarred for the rest of their life as a result of that. They would whip the men in public, that was and it was a way of suggesting to the plantation, this is what happens to you. They generally did not whip the women in public because they realized that if you went that far, you could cause some significant reaction on the part of men and others. But anyway, this would be a constant kind of part of it. And there could be stocks and other types of things. Sometimes if, the person was a runaway, they'd put an iron yoke around their neck that would have these long bars going out to kind of inhibit them from traveling too far. They did use the ball and chain, so you'd actually have a shackle, a large ball, and you'd have to carry it. You didn't drag it, you had to carry it, basically, if you wanted to move in any particular kind of way. They even had iron masks, almost like torture masks, that would be put over the face, of course, inhibit everything in terms of, your breathing, your eating, all these kind of things, a variety of punishments. And of course, if it was severe enough, they would chop off someone's foot, they would castrate a person, not necessarily in any kind of public way, and of course, they would kill you. I mean, if the action was severe enough, the slave could be killed in front of it. It's an interesting thing, there were pathological masters that killed their slaves, just ruthless, extremely mean, and killed their slaves. And they were often seen in a very negative way by the white community. That was not a good thing. And there are actually some of them that might have, they were taken to court, and some of them might have been executed for their acts if they were pathological in terms of their violence against slavery. And in part, it wasn't so much that they were violent that was the problem, but it just was, there was a lack of intelligence. This is your capital asset, and you're destroying it? You're crazy. There's some kind of problem with you in a serious sort of way. Anyway, but generally speaking, if there was any reason that the slave had done, if there was a reason there, and all they had to do, why did you kill your slave? I killed him because he looked at me wrong or something like that. That's enough, okay? You always, as a slave, lived under the threat of violence. It's part of your world, okay? Let's just say we did our business in the privy and we're going home, going back to our quarters. It's time to eat. And it's an interesting kind of situation for food. The slaves actually had a fairly heavy diet. Estimated that the average male slave consumed about 4,000 calories per day. And of course, they're working very hard. Not going to be a lot of fat slaves or anything like that, but they are consuming a lot of calories. But there was, a blandness sort of to the diet and a lack of nutrition that becomes the problem. The slaves describe it as hog meat and hoe cake, okay? It was cornmeal and fatback. It was the crappy part of the pig, whatever it was, the fatty part of it, with corn in whatever way you could possibly do it. And of course, the problem with their situation was how do you endlessly have to eat cornmeal and fatback or something like that and do a variety of things with it. And they tried their best, of course. Grits is corn, is it not? I was trying to think about grits. Is it? I don't know enough about grits. So that would be one way, of course. That's like a corn mush that you could do. They would bake it. They would fry it, of course. Cornmeal in whatever form you possibly can, mixed in whatever you could. Oftentimes, not a lot to season it or to flavor it in any kind of way. If they could find honey, of course, they would use it. That would be part of it. They actually used clay as a flavoring. They would put the clay into it. And of course, the problem with that is that, that could bring other things into your system, too. That might be a source of hookworm or whatever. By the way, Southern whites were known known for eating dirt also. You know, just things that poor whites, it was a way of flavoring a variety of different things that they would do. Anyway, you know, it's a pretty boring kind of thing that you're having day after day after day. That's what would be provided. That was the provided component of your diet. Slaves, you know, saw that that's all it was, and they did everything they could to kind of augment that in a variety of ways. They would have their own little gardens if they could, and of course they often would tend to those as carefully as they could, and oftentimes even spent more time, as well as more energy, I should say, and more focus on their own gardens than whatever the agricultural activities of the plantation were all about. They were very adept at just capturing critters. That was part of the enhancement of their diet. Coon and possum, and they made little traps and stuff like that, and blackbirds that they could catch or whatever. Suckers and perch and cats, you know, were the kind of things that they would catch out of the creeks, and whenever they could get that, of course, that would be some kind of enhancement. They routinely stole for food. And, you know, it creates this, it's an interesting component of the plantation environment that there always was thievery. It's always there, of course, and why would it not? You know, what moral obligation do they have to uphold the regime of the plantation? And to a certain degree, the planters even realize this, that it's just part of the system. And so, you know, if a couple hams are missing once in a while, if it was too much, of course, you had to confront that. But periodically, you know, they're going to just try to steal food. They conducted all the slaughtering on the plantation. They're part of the food processing situation. And generally speaking, everything that was good, of course, from the slaughtering went to the white people. And all the crap that was left behind, of course, would go to the slaves, and they could do what they wanted. And they would take the heads, and they would take the tails, and they would take the internal organs, of course, and do whatever they could with them, and become fairly adept at utilizing these things. I never had chitlins before. Has anyone had chitlins in the room? Okay. A student was doing a presentation in my history class, and they're welcome to do whatever they want as long as it's historically oriented. And she just said to me, "Can I do chitlins?" And I said, "Sure, that's not, I've heard of them, I don't know what they are." So she brought them, and they were these fried little objects, okay? She cooked them up and everything like that. Fried objects, and I remember she handed me mine, and I went like this, and I noted it was tubular, and I was trying to think, now what's tubular in meat, okay? There's not a whole lot of tubular meat. And what was so funny was, you know, we ate it. It wasn't actually that bad. But then, you know, she began to describe what's going on. A number of students had eaten. A couple of them ran out of the room at that moment. I'm not exactly sure what was going on. They were like, "Oh my God, are they going to go barf?" You know, maybe she should have warned her, "Here, try a chitlin, and then I'll tell you about it." That was quite a fun thing to do. But she pulled out this pig's intestine out of her Tupperware to show us what it did. We're all like, that's when I did my little you know, and ready to run for it. And the funniest thing about this is she later took that day, this was Escondido, she took it that day, she pulled her intestine out of the Tupperware and threw it away in the girls' bathroom. And apparently a couple women saw that, or someone in the bathroom saw this, and they just decided for fun they were going to pull that intestine out of the bathroom, and they stuck it on the commode. Can we turn the camera off for a second? No, but you know, it's just a dumb story. But later on, someone came in and they see this weird thing, internal organ, dangling over the commode. And you know, they go to the campus authorities. They called the cops. I come on my classroom. I'm wondering why the cops are all over the place, and there's parts that are marked, you know, and they're looking for. They thought it was an umbilical cord, and there was a baby, and it actually made it into the press. I'm like, doggone, that was an exciting presentation. What can I say? Anyway, it was so funny. You know, I got the car the next time I came back to class, and one of my students runs across the parking lot to see me, and I'm like, you know, no student ever runs across the parking lot to see me. And she wanted to show me the article and tell me what was going on. I just, oh my goodness, that's terribly interesting. Anyway, but it shows you just kind of, you know, the willingness or the ability of the slaves to take whatever they had for them and enhance their diets to some degree, but still, you know, a lack of protein, a lack of vitamins, ill health is the result of the diet that the slaves would have. They just say you're done with it, whatever your breakfast is, and by now the sun's coming up, and the rule of the day was essentially the slave worked from sunup to sundown. So as soon as the sun was beginning to come over the horizon, the slaves were on their way to the fields. And you probably know that the slaves had different jobs and would go different places. There were those who would go to the house, you know, to the big house or something like that. And they usually had better clothing. In fact, some of them on wealthy plantations were dressed in livery, you know, and they would be dressed in maids' outfits and the whole kind of thing. And, you know, there was an advantage to that. You got to go, and it's an easier kind of work situation. You're cleaning up, and you're just dealing with the things of the household. The bad news was, though, you had to endlessly be with the white people. people, and whatever their situation was and their attitudes and endlessly dealing with them. And it could be an emotional hothouse. It could be, there's part of me that thinks that you would not necessarily want to be, you're right there with them. The men are there to take advantage of you necessarily. You're going to see the issues and problems of the household impacting you in a variety of different ways. It was an easier life, but it had its problems too. There were skilled slaves, and these guys would go off to do their business. They're going to be the blacksmiths, the wheelwrights, the coopers, those who would work on the gins, etc. But the vast majority of the slaves, if we were slaves, we would be field hands, okay? That's what we did. And it's that interesting objectification. We're just hands that they're going to use, of course, out there in the fields of cotton, essentially. The primary, of course, crop of the South was cotton. South was the cotton kingdom. And everything we did in one way or the other was kind of bound up in cotton. We would prepare the soil for cotton in the winter. We'd bring fertilizer out for it. When the spring came, of course, we did the plowing. We would do the planting. We would do endless amounts of sort of the cutting of the cotton or the hoeing of the cotton to make sure the plants were the right distance apart from each other. Many days just out there endlessly kind of chopping cotton one way or the other. And of course we would do the picking of the cotton, usually done in the later part of the fall. I always think of the cotton, you're going to sweat and it's really hot when you're picking. Often it was cold when you're picking cotton. You're out there picking cotton. Cotton is it's an easy thing to do. I'm sure you guys know it's not difficult. Yeah.
After the war, how does South survive?
Way off topic, but really a good question. They're gonna continue to grow cotton, and it's going to be now a sharecropping system, of course. So the economy will look very much the same. It's just and the people are functioning in the same sorts of way. But it's also not going to work very well, and the Southern economy is going to go down after the Civil War is over. Anyway, but cotton plants, you guys ever seen cotton? We don't have it a whole lot. Oh, we actually do have it in California, don't we, in the Central Valley. But it's a bush about this high. It comes out with a little pale yellow or pale orange, kind of pink, I think it is, a little flower. It's really kind of pretty. And not associated with that is a hard cotton ball. It looks kind of like a rosebud as it comes out. And then it's just going to pop up with the cotton ball itself. And by the way, the covering of the husk of that, as it pulls back, it's very sharp. It's like, they're all on angles, so they pull back, and, things you picture you cutting your hands on them or something like that as you would do it. The big problem with cotton, though, is that it kind of grows low. It grows from here all the way to the ground. So I picture this day of just all day long, bending over, and, you guys are young, you can manage that. It's going to take me about 15 minutes before I'm going to have a problem with that. And they'd have these long cotton sacks that they would drag, and you would pick roughly 200 pounds of cotton a day. And you guys know that cotton is not heavy, so 200 pounds of cotton is a lot of cotton. Just this long, long day picking cotton. Nowadays, of course, it's all mechanized. It's going to happen relatively quickly. In those days, that was the essential need of labor. It's a labor-intensive situation, and they needed the slaves to do that particular thing. Okay. Anyway, when the sun began to go down, of course, the people could go back to the slaves could go back to the quarters. And now, of course, they had to do all the things to work for themselves. They had to take care of their garden, take care of their family, cook their meals, get their houses together, all of that. And I picture, not long after the sun goes down, after you've done these things, you're just exhausted, and you fall back onto that cotton tick filled with straw or husk and go to sleep, of course, in expectation of the next day that will come. There's an image, part of me that, when I think of slavery, I think of just being in that cotton row and it looking endless. It's like it's a nightmare kind of scenario. It's endlessness, essentially. And all day long, all you're doing is picking that cotton. Your back's aching and you're under the sun and you're struggling. And there's no compensation for what you're doing. There's no hope of reward at the end of the row or the end of the life. There's no retirement. There's no pay. There's no advance. There's no nothing. And all over it, of course, is the threat of violence, the threat of sexual abuse, all these kind of things. And it creates this powerful notion in my mind of, my God, how did these people cope? How did they survive in this? I must tell you that, when I think about slavery, it's not so much an intellectual thing with me as more of a personal thing. And, I'm not black. You guys can see that. That's not my thing. But I was a child of the 1960s. And it's not like, I always hate to say, like, oh, that's so much more important than anyone else's time. I know it's not. But it was a time of intense things that were going on. And I mean, when I was a child, I was really a child, 3 years old in 1960 and 13 in 1970, okay? So I'm a kid. I was not a hippie, of course. I did not smoke dope. I didn't do that kind of stuff. I did it in the 70s, but don't tell, did I? Oh my God, the camera's on. Anyway, I'm just kidding. I would never have smoked marijuana or anything like that. Anyway, you know, I was a child, okay? And I'm a child at a time, of course, of the war in Vietnam, with the student movies, the hippies, the countercultural explosion. Assassinations seemed to be a regular kind of thing, right? Major ones, JFK, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy. I still remember, like, my mom coming in. I don't know why, but I just really liked Robert Kennedy. I was 11 years old, and I thought he was like, he's the man, he's the guy, you know. And my mom comes in, and she's telling, Chris, I have something really, you know, he'd been killed that night before, and just like, whoa, really hard for an 11-year-old to kind of take that all in. But of course, one of the things, and my mom and dad were really interesting. They wanted us to be aware of the moment, and they were the children of like the McCarthy era. And I think that when the 60s came along, they wanted to be hippies. They were really unhappy that they had missed that kind of, and it was sad. I had to tell them as a kid, you guys, you know, you have children, you can't be hippies, you have to be regular people as much as you possibly can. But, you know, they became engaged to a certain degree in the civil rights movement. I actually went to black churches and I was singing, you know, we shall overcome, holding hands this way. It's a real kind of interesting way to hold hands. Anyway, you know, it's like, and just seeing what was on TV, what's going on in Birmingham, knowing about the kids being killed in the churches, you know, the people being hit by the water hoses, the electric cattle prods, the dogs, you know. I mean, it was so interesting. As a little child, I knew who were right and who were wrong. I mean, I could see the righteousness of the cause of the African American, and I could see the violence and the viciousness of the Southern white attitude, you know. And it was just like, it hit me so hard, and I became obsessed with it. What can I say? Obsessed with the issues of racism as they are in America, and then obsessed with everything that was the foundational component of it, especially slavery. And I just sort of, you know, I dedicated my intellectual growth to understanding it as much as I possibly can. And what was weird, you know, at some point as a historian, it's like, I don't want to just know about those people, but I want to feel them. I want to know what it's like to be them in some ways. And in part of me, I don't know what it is, you know, wanting to understand them, wanting to see how they get through their lives, wanting to see how they cope, you know, and just being sort of seeing it as this heroic activity in one way or another. But what it has led me to, of course, is just an attempt to try to understand slavery, but also understand how they dealt with it. That's the part that I think is so interesting. Whenever I think about so many things in history, it's like I always wonder, and I guess I want to put myself into their situation. And it's very personal. It's not like I'm doing it for anybody else, though I like it that, you know, I'm able to take that and then, you know, convey it to my class. But it's like, you know, and this is going to sound almost weird, but I want to know what it's like to be an African on the slave ship as it's coming over, you know. I mean, I only want to be there for a second, but I want to feel that for a second so I can know and I can empathize with them. And it was horrible. I'm sure you guys know, you're stuck in a slave ship. All these people, it's hotter than hell. They're seasick. They're pooping on you. They're peeing on you. I mean, it's a horrific kind of situation. You can't believe it. But for a second there, you know, I'm like, God, what was that like so I can see and I can identify with these people? You know, this is going to sound crazy, but I want to be standing in a train with a bunch of Jews going into Auschwitz just to see that and to feel that. And of course, you know, the extraordinary agony and the horror of the whole kind of situation. But to know it, you know, and to empathize with them. It's the same kind of thing with me and slavery. I just wanted, what is it like? You know, what was it like? How did they deal with these kind of things? How did they confront this? Would I be able to survive? You know, part of me thinks that if I'm thrown into that situation, I'm going to be dropping off there very soon, you know. So I just wanted to know what it was like, of course, and how they dealt with it in whatever way. And the critical thing that, you know, becomes the interesting point to me as far as slavery is concerned, you know, it's terrible. We all get that. But, you know, what did they do? How did they cope with slavery? What were the mechanisms they used to kind of sustain themselves? What I think is so interesting is that they develop mechanisms, and these become really interesting and really powerful. In many ways, I perceive it as the heroic expression of slave. You know, this is their heroism, that they found a way in a situation that was just absolutely miserable and violent and vicious to make a life for themselves and to sustain themselves, to give themselves dignity, to give themselves a sense of integrity, to give themselves a sense of self, you know, where they could continue on and make their way, you know, through slavery, ultimately, of course, with the goal of freedom. And you know, luckily, that's the way that it's going to go. But I want to just suggest ways to you that they coped, okay? These are coping mechanisms. And one was resistance, and I hope you guys know, were slaves happy in slavery? The white people would want you to think that, okay? They're all a bunch of Sambos, just happy-go-lucky, having a good time, frolicking through their lives, and they're, you know, that's exactly what the pro-slavery ideology suggested, of course. But if you you look closely at slavery, you see that there is an endless discontent expressed in a variety of different ways. And, it doesn't explode in the big way. It's like, as modern Americans, we want them to rise up and just kill all the white people or something. Like that's a massive revolt or something like that. There were revolts, of course, that occurred in American history. Denmark Vesey, Nat Turner. There was a revolt that I came across in terms of just my own study in Mississippi, 1835. It never even happened. It was just a rumor of revolt. But slaves lived in a police state. They lived in a police state where all the institutions of authority were turned against them. And if they would try something like this, and Nat Turner's pretty amazing, rises up and they're going to kill 60 white people, but then it's going to be every single one of them that's a participant, and every single one that was also associated with it is going to be executed. If you rose up in revolt, this was suicide. You will be killed. You will be crushed, essentially. And so it was not the kind of resistance that we see very often, and slaves just sort of understood that essential reality. Instead, their resistance was kind of subtle often, okay? Like, working slow. Just work slow, okay? And why work fast? It doesn't make any sense to anybody to work fast, so work slow. Work badly. That's an easy one, right? And, it's a good way of just sort of simple protest. You're hoeing the cotton, supposed to be hoeing the weed, and unfortunately, you're hitting the cotton plants. Damn. Massa, I'm having a bad day. I'm 0 for 3 so far, But it was a way of just kind of putting in their face. They got sick, I already told you that, but they also faked sickness. Why not? Why would you, Massa, I'm not feeling good today. It's a good way of getting around the whole situation. Some of them would go so far as to injure themselves. That's one way to make, I'm going to just break my foot and break my hand. It's a way to get myself out of trouble, out of the work at least. They would break their tools routinely. And, they had a lot of hoes, and it was just so easy to break the hoe handle. And the result was that in slavery, they create these monsterly thick hoe handles that are super hard to break. And of course, if you broke it too many times, they'd give you a really thick, short handle, and that's a drag, because you're going to have to bend over all day, But that was one thing you could do. But if you're working the cotton gin, you could accidentally throw a piece of metal in oh, damn it, machine's broken. What are we going to do today? That kind of thing. Those were things that you could do, and they're happening all the time, okay? Sometimes it got more violent and it got more personal. The slaves could be pushed to the limit, and they would rise up violently against those that would oppress them. And they did beat up, and Frederick Douglass beats up the slave breaker. And it's that interesting story where nothing happens because the slave breaker doesn't want to lose his reputation as a slave breaker, so he doesn't tell anybody. It's an interesting result of that situation. More commonly, if you beat that person up, you're probably going to get killed. But they did it, okay? They were willing to take that particular risk. Sometimes, a little more of a subterfuge attack upon the establishment, they would poison people. They poison their masters, Here they are in a situation where they have access to the food and stuff like that. That was something they could do. Arson was relatively common. It's that kind of crime where you commit it and you can run pretty far away. And of course, in those days, hard to identify exactly what's happening there, but these things did happen. And out murder. They just murdered, their masters. They murdered the overseers upon occasion. If that was the situation, they would do that. Often, of course, with dire repercussion as a result of that. So we all have to at least understand that part of it. But there was always resistance. And one of the more powerful forms of resistance, of course, was simply they ran away. The runaway slave is an icon of slavery, and I mean that literally, because there were so many runaway slaves that they would print them in the newspaper, and they had to have an icon of the runaway slave, and it looked like this. He's running, okay? And, and when they would have their icon of the runaway slave so everyone could see the advertisement, and then they would read up the description of the person. Slaves ran away all the time, and the masters called it the chief disease of slavery. This is a significant problem. Now, I want you guys to know that they ran away, but very few of them ever ran away to freedom. That was a really, really hard thing to do. So instead, they ran away to the canebrake. They ran away into the woods. They ran to another plantation and hung out there for a while. It was just a form of protest. And a form of protest, of course, you're going to pay a high price for this. They'd send the dogs out. They'd send the patrollers out. They would drag your butt back there. They would lash you, tie you up, and they would whip the crap out of you. And I already told you, if they did it too many times, cut the foot off, too many times more than that, maybe castration will be the way of confronting this particular issue. But they did it all the time, regardless of the potential cost. And it's like this endless statement: we are unhappy. This is not good. We are seeking something different if we possibly can. But resistance was just a constant manifestation, and I'm going to suggest to you an expression of their humanity and their dignity. Right? I mean, they realized this was wrong, and they wanted everyone to. They knew it, of course, and they wanted to express it as much as they possibly could. other methodologies of coping. One was the family. And it's so interesting. When we think about the slave family, we think of a family that's under fire. You know, it's essentially a capital asset subject to the will and to the whim of the plantation owners. So they would never allow any kind of legal marriage in slavery. What God has joined together, let no man tear asunder. And that's a serious kind of thing. So neither a religious or a technical manifestation of marriage in any particular kind of way. The slaves would do their own informal jumping over the broom into the land of matrimony. That is true. But the masters did not recognize this, okay? So a capital asset, if they needed to separate it, they would. And you hear the horrific kind of manifestations of this. Like in Virginia, it's estimated in the late antebellum period, so this would have been the 1840s, 1850s, probably 75% of the slaves born in Virginia were separated from their families. It suggests a very weak family situation. The reason was that Virginia was not doing very well in terms of its general slave economy, and it's pretty much selling its slaves. The money is to be made off the selling of slaves to the deeper South, where they would go and be part of the cotton economy. That's where they would head. But you know, it gives you this image, and there was this, just I can't remember where it came from, but a mother who's having to go away from her daughter, and you know, the last little thing she could say to her is, you know, we will meet again in heaven. That's the best she could hope for and guarantee. We will meet again in heaven, because families are being separated, husbands from wives, children from parents, etc., brothers from sisters. This is the reality of slavery, okay? But the intriguing thing is that slaves did have families, and it was pretty much it's an economic situation. The masters decided that they wanted to have more slaves, and one way to do this was to create procreative units, and every time that, a slave baby was born, it was money in the bank. Cha-ching. It's like a stock split. You've made more money. So they actually promoted a nuclear family unit within slavery. They wanted a man and a woman together to be procreative. And thus, their economic desire creates the foundation for a slave family. And the slaves took that little bit that they had, of course, and they ran with it. And they valued their families. They treasured their families. They did have that little slave quarter where their family was, and they could go inside there, and they could commiserate and interact with each other, and they could love each other, and support each other. It was a critical part of it. And one of the ironies is that those who have studied the slave family sometimes argue that the slave family was stronger than the 20th century African-American family, much more focused upon it. All the institutional structures, the racism, discrimination, urbanization, industrialization, all these things had done damage to the black family in the 20th century. It may have been stronger under slavery. And we see with emancipation, the first thing the freedmen do is they seek their families to bring them back together. And it was so important to them. We can just kind of see this, all right? Not only was there the family, but there was the larger community. And one thing I want you guys to know is that, slavery was not unmitigated agony. The slaves found ways to have fun, and they pretty much found it within the structures of the community. And, they didn't have to work on Sundays. You probably sometimes half day on Saturday and Sunday night, and they would frolic. They called it frolic. And the music would start, of course, and they would sing and they would dance. And, if the master was cool, he'd give them some liquor, and they'd get drunk, and they'd have themselves a hell of a good time. And they loved to get together and talk and commiserate and complain about the master, complain about their situation, and make each other laugh whatever way they possibly could. They became very good at that, just grabbing what joy they possibly could. Not to mention the fact that the community was always there to sustain the family. If a father was sold off or a mother was sold off or something like that, every adult male and every adult female, we call them fictive kinship. The children called them all uncles and aunts, okay? It doesn't matter if they're related or not. They're all uncles and aunts. And the idea was that if, the real parent is gone, then the uncle and the aunts will step in. They're going to help the person, okay, and to sustain them. So the community was there to sustain you in the face of the potential breakup of a family or something like that. Also, so you have the community working with you. They also coped using religion, and I'm sure you guys know this. By the time, of course, the slaves got to the Civil War, at least, the vast majority of slaves are Christians, evangelical Christians, Baptists and Methodists primarily, but they are Christians. They have been taught Christianity, and that means there is a divorcing from their original culture. As they came to America, they were probably African traditional religions, that we call it, or Muslims. They were Islamic or something like that. They come to America, of course, part of the indoctrination is this transformation to Christianity. And they were taught a version of Christianity by the white people, and they often would have to go to the white person's church on Sunday, of course, and they'd sit in an area, and they would listen to a lesson that was absolutely tailored to tell them that, of course, they're slaves and subservient, and wives obey your master, or your husband, and slaves obey your master. It's the way the kind of thing would go. A message of Christianity that enhanced the notions of slavery, essentially. But what happened later on Sunday is that they'd often go off by themselves, and for some reason they use this notion of the brush arbor. It's a brush arbor, going into a place place in the countryside or going into a barn, and sometimes they would turn a kettle over. They believed that the kettle would absorb the sound because they were going to let loose, and they didn't want everyone to know exactly what they were going to do. But they would then have their own Christianity, basically, which emphasized the equality of Christianity. Jesus says, let all come unto me, and they loved that notion. In fact, their notion was that they were superior to the white people. Their Christianity is a pure Christianity, and they could identify with the Israelites, as they were slaves in Egypt, and they could identify, with the whole Christian. And Christianity in the very beginning, of course, was sort of a religion of slaves, the way it began in the Roman Empire. And it offered them this notion, of course, of their own individual dignity, their equality in the eyes of God, and the hope of their salvation. Of course, all those things that could be sustaining to them. Religion was a very powerful tool as far as they were concerned for coping with slavery. Marx calls religion the opiate of the masses, and he means that it's a delusion, of course, put upon by the elites that force you, make it so that you don't care about what you get in this world and you'll just be happy with what you get in the next kind of world. But some Marxists have actually taken this and flipped it a little bit, that opiate it can be just a recreational drug or something like that, but it also can be medicine, right? And religion became a medicine, a drug that would sustain them essentially through the difficulties of slavery in a very powerful kind of way. Finally, they used sort of cultural expressions as a coping method. Slaves were very culturally expressive in a variety of ways, artistically to some degree. They brought from Africa certain skills that will manifest. Very good basket makers. In South Carolina especially, you can see this. Today there's a road, a highway. You drive out of Charleston, you go north, and I can't remember what the beach is up there, but very popular beach. And they called the highway like the Basket Weavers Highway or something like that. And it was just weird because there were all these stands and African-American women who had made these baskets, and they're really beautiful baskets. And of course, I had to pull over, and I really wanted one. But I swear, a basket like this was like $300. Oh my God! I mean, they're really expensive. It's kind of a tourist thing. So I got myself a one that big, and it was like $10. And of course, that shows that I'm cheap. But I actually did buy and try to support the local economy. Pottery, they did good pottery. Some architectural techniques that we can see in sort of the slave quarters in various areas. We see that. The craftsmen, of course, were extremely good. They're African-American slave blacksmiths, very creative carpenters, the things that they could do. They made really wonderful quilts, and the quilts are intriguing because some people suggest that the quilts are actually, not just quilts and beautiful, but messages and maps and things like that they could do. But anytime they could do something like that, make little dolls or whatever, an expression of self, a way of enlivening their situation, an expression of their humanity and their dignity, basically. That was one thing that they could do. They also had a rich oral tradition. It was against the law to teach a slave to read and write. You probably know that, of course, and the statement of Frederick Douglass is the best one I've ever heard. He's learning how to read and write in this household in Baltimore, and the master comes home and finds it, and he says, you can't teach a slave to read and write. It's against the law, and you'll ruin a good slave. And of course, Frederick Douglass says, hell yes, you will ruin you might create a great man, but you'll ruin a good slave. Frederick Douglass was a terrible slave, if you ever read about it. He's just like the worst slave ever, okay? But he was a great man, and that's sort of the issue there. So they weren't able to read and write, though they did sometimes get it, and of course they wanted to read the Bible and things like that if they possibly could. But they had a rich literary sort of oral tradition. They told stories, and some of this is coming directly out of Africa, to America. Unique storytelling activities. Africans would do these kind of stories that had an oral component, a musical component, a congregative component, a pantomime component, and an acting. Same kind of thing begins to resonate as far as the slaves are concerned. And their slaves were, the stories were for entertainment. There were body stories, just to make them laugh or whatever, but often edifying types of stories where they were trying to teach each other or to spread lessons about what was going on. They used tricksters' tales. They call them tricksters' tales, and these were tales to suggest, how you kind of trick people. And the whole idea was that if you're a slave, you've got to kind of disguise your behavior and your attitude, especially towards white people. You've got to outthink them because they have all the power and you're in the weak situation. So you need to be that person who can get out of really difficult circumstances. And out of this will come very famous stories like the Tar Baby. You guys heard of the Tar Baby? Tar Baby is Brer Rabbit and Brer Fox, and Brer Rabbit's like this, smart alecky rabbit, and just a rabbit though. And he wanders through, always kind of doing whatever he wants. And there's a Brer Rabbit and a Brer Bear and a Brer Fox. So these are a fox and a bear, much more powerful, of course, and they want to catch that rabbit, but they're having a hard time doing it. So they create the tar baby. You guys have never heard this one? It's a classic story. A tar baby, of course, it's made out of tar. And they stick it on the side of the road because they know that Brer Rabbit will mess with it and probably get stuck up in it. But, you know, here comes Brer Rabbit, and he's going down, and he says, howdy to the tar baby. And to tar baby, he say nothing. You know, the tar baby says nothing, and that's going to go on for a little while until Brer Rabbit's really pissed off. So he pops the tar baby, you know, hits him with his paw, and gets stuck. And that makes him really mad, so he hits him with his other one, that one, you know, and pretty soon he's enveloped in tar. And here come Brer Bear and Brer Fox out, and they've got him, okay? They've got him. They're going to eat him. They're going to kill him and all that kind of stuff. And they start to discuss how they're going to kill him. And so here's Brer Rabbit stuck in trouble. He starts to try to outthink him, and he starts to say, you know, I don't care how you guys kill me. Just don't throw me in the briar patch. I just don't want to go in the briar patch. And, you know, slowly but surely he puts this into their minds. You know, they're not quite as intelligent. Well, I know the thing we should do with the rabbit. We should throw him in the briar patch. And ultimately that's what happens, of course. They throw him in the briar patch. And, you know, Brer Rabbit, born and bred in the briar patch. That's where, you know, so he escapes and he makes it off. Outthink, you know, in some way, if you possibly can, those who can hurt you, those who can oppress you. There was also the famous Cap'n Jack stories. I don't know if you heard of the Cap'n Jacks, but this was like a superhero, slave superhero, who was always getting himself out of scrapes. And the one story I always remember is that Cap'n Jack goes into town one day. He's in a wagon, and someone accosts him and tells him that, you know, he's stolen the wagon, so he's brought before the magistrate, you know, to answer for this kind of thing. And he's standing in a line, of course, and there's like 3 guys in front of him, and the first guy steps up, and you know, the crime apparently is that this guy had stole a horse. And the guy looks to the judge and says, I didn't steal a horse. I've known this horse since it was a colt. And apparently that was enough to convince the judge that he was innocent, and he gets to go, okay? And the next guy comes up, and, you know, it's like he stole a cow. And the guy says, you know, well, I didn't steal the cow. I've known this cow since it was a calf. And so that gets him off. And here comes the Cap'n Jack. And of course, you know, he sees what happened before. And he says, you know, he says here, you stole a wagon. And he says, well, no, Judge, I didn't steal it. I've known it since it was a tree. And apparently that was enough to get him off, okay? And you guys aren't laughing. He had to be there. It was really funny when it was told in the first instance. Anyway, so there's an oral tradition. Finally, of course, you know, and where I wanted to head with this whole thing, there was a musical cultural expression that becomes part of it. And African-American music, as far as I'm concerned, is, you know, one of the essential expressions of American culture. It is one of the greatest things that we've created as far as our nation is concerned. And so many manifestations will come out of this, including, of course, the blues, spiritual music, jazz, rock and roll, rap music. It sort of goes on endlessly. And many Europeans who look at, you know, the United States of America in terms of its musical originality point to the African-American traditions as the essence of that expression. And, you know, I'm not exactly sure what it is. I think that there is like a cultural expressions that happen under oppression, and some people turn to a variety of different things. I got to turn this thing on real quick. The Irish are so incredibly expressive. We need to go back. Somehow we must have pressed the button. Can you go back? Is it working? It's got to go green. Keep going back. Is anything coming up yet? Okay, let's go right there. Okay.
Sorry.
I am not technologically astute at all, so here's my attempt to kind of do this. What I want to do, of course, is share some of the slave songs with you guys, the music that they use, very creative to say the least, perhaps an expression of the culture of oppression in its own way. But it was something that, you know, of course, they weren't inhibited in. So many things they were inhibited in, but no one said that they couldn't sing or they couldn't express themselves. So, you know, that's one thing that they did, and they did it in such an incredible way that even the white people of the era were very attracted to it in one way or the other. I remember reading a situation where the slaves were singing, and some white northern lady came in, and it was so emotional and powerful that she had to run out. I'm going, God, that's interesting. You can't even take it. Oh, it's such an expressive kind of thing. But what I want to do is just kind of share some slave music with you guys. As I do this, I first want you guys to know that I am a rank amateur musically. I've been interested in slave music for a long, long time, and I learned some of these songs when I was a kid, basically. But I'm not a great singer or a great guitarist or anything. This is a great way to set it all up, right? So this is going to sound really crappy. But I do want to share some of these things, you know, and teach it to you if I possibly can, all right? And one thing that I want to do is try to get you guys involved. So now you have to be the slave with me, all right? And the first thing I want to start with, go ahead and click, give me a click. I want to start with the work songs. The slaves sang songs for all kinds of reasons. And one of the things that they did, most commonly, since so much of their world was sort of centered around their work, was to create songs that would simply get them through their day. And you can understand what it was. It was a way of just getting through the tedium, of course, making the day pass a little bit quicker, making it seem like it was a group activity instead of you being all by yourself, stuck out there in the middle of the field or something like that. And allowing you to create some kind of a rhythm where you all work together. All these things sort of become an essential expression of the work songs. And they're really powerful in that they ultimately, of course, will evolve towards things like the blues. And there's a rhythm here and everything that becomes very important. Anyway, so what I want to try to do, go ahead and click me one. I'm hoping my voice is going to make this happen. One thing about the sources, because it's a difficult kind of thing to find the sources, because these were created by the slaves, sung by the slaves. And one of the real tragedies is, as soon as freedom came along, a lot of the African Americans kind of thought that it wasn't very dignified to do the old slave songs, so they kind of wanted to move away from them if they could. But, so they're not, it was only some of them have been captured. But one nice thing, really not, is that pretty soon you get something called convict labor and convict slavery, some people call it. And if you see the slave songs reviving themselves through, you guys have a sense of the chain gang? Does that mean anything to you guys? So guys working in Mississippi on the chain gang or something like that, this is where these things come from, okay? But this one's called I'll Be So Glad. And I'm going to try to get my tune for it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the first, I do that, I'll be so glad, and you guys, that's what everyone will be doing. Okay? And then you're going to repeat what I said. When the sun go down, you go, when the sun go down, I'll be so glad. When the sun go down, I ain't that sleepy, but I want to lay down. Okay, you want to try it? So you guys, first, you guys are you're the parenthetical component, okay? I'll be so glad when. You gotta be really cool. You guys are agreeing with me. Okay? I'll be so glad when. Wait. Gotta give you like a little bit of a beat, okay? I'll be so glad when the sun go down. I'll be so glad when the sun go down. I ain't all that sleepy, but I wanna lie down. I ain't all that sleepy, but I wanna lie down. Now chop your corner like I chop mine. Now chop your corner like I chop mine. You won't be worried, no, when the sun go down. You won't be worried, no, when the sun go down. It could be a little bit better than that, you guys. Are not bad, but okay. All right, go ahead and click it, okay? I'd really like you guys to sing all the songs with me, and I've never taught people how to sing songs. I realize it's kind of a dumb thing. But, I can like start through the verse or something like that, and I'll stop and we'll see if we can make the thing work together. This comes from a guy by the name of, I think his name was Charles Ledbetter, but they called him Leadbelly. And Leadbelly was found by a talent scout on a chain gang in Mississippi. And he was singing all these songs and playing his guitar and everything like that. And I don't know, somebody out of New York just thought it was really cool, and they started to record this stuff. Now, this is done in the 1930s. But Leadbelly says, he got everything from his mom and dad, and they were born in slavery, okay? So this is stuff that's coming out of that. But, just kind of, this was a work song that you may have heard of before, real simple kind of work song, just as a way to get through the day as far as picking cotton was concerned, of course, and real simple words. And I'll go ahead and just start it for you. I'm only going to use 2 strings to play it because it's just so, it's interesting, not necessarily a lot of variation in the way you're singing it, just all within one chord. I learned how to play guitar yesterday, so give me a second here, okay? Gonna jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton. Jump down, turn around, pick a bale of day. Oh, Lordy, pick a bale of cotton. Oh, Lordy, pick a bale of day. You guys ready to try? Okay, here we go. Gonna jump down, turn around, pick a bale of cotton. Jump down, turn around, pick a bale of day. Oh, Lordy, pick a bale of cotton. Oh, Lordy, pick a bale a day. Me and my wife, we pick a bale of cotton. Me and my wife, we pick a bale a day. Oh, Lordy, pick a bale of cotton. Can't hear you. Oh, Lordy, pick a bale a day. Now it's really late in the day. We're tired. All my life I picked a bale of cotton. All my life I picked a bale a day. Oh, Lordy, pick a bale of cotton. Oh, Lordy, pick a bale a day. Cool. Hit it. There were fun songs, you know, and for whatever reason, I just didn't focus on the fun songs. Spirituals, of course, are a very powerful component of the slave music. This is, you know, of all the music that's actually been recorded or has been recorded, well, recorded one way or the other, not necessarily musically recorded. Spirituals are the number one thing that we see coming out of slavery. And there are a variety of these, and I've already kind of said, you know, the work songs can be spiritual. The No More is actually a spiritual kind of song, right? But go ahead and click it if you don't mind. This is a very famous song, of course. The slaves absolutely identified with the Hebrews, ancient Hebrews, right? Because they were slaves in Egypt. And, you know, they liked to identify because it gave them a sense of their relationship to the people in the Bible, but also because the Israelites are freed, right? I mean, that's a critical thing. And it was just, you know, so powerful here. And it's so interesting. The white people could never tell them not to sing this because this is a biblical story, right? But you can imagine the subversive kind of thing that's going through their, you know, they're talking about themselves and they're talking about freedom, right? I mean, these are relatively subversive things in slavery. But a very famous one that I learned in Sunday school, anyone else learn it in Sunday school? It's called Go Down Moses. When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oh, pressed so hard they could not stand. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down to Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. You know, that would be a calm response too. I'd say, you know, when Israel was in Egypt land, you guys all go, let my people go. It just lets you know that would just, it works out in its own way. Go ahead and hit the button. We're going to have to go through our songs pretty. One of the more interesting songs are called message songs. These were songs to convey some kind of a message, almost in code. You know, a lot of just interesting words that became essentially code words. South could mean negative and hell. Heaven was the north, you know, maybe more particularly Canada. If you say pharaohs, you're probably talking about the white people, right? No, different things. But they wanted to communicate to themselves sometimes in kind of in the musical way, and it seemed innocent enough, but yet it may convey some kind of powerful idea. Omar, if you don't mind hitting this one. This one's kind of famous. It's called "Oh Mary, Don't You Weep," and you can kind of hear the message. The message is pretty, you know, right there for you. But I'll go ahead and do this for you. If I could, I surely would stand on the rock where Moses stood. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Oh, Mary, don't you weep, don't you moan. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Here's the message. One of these nights about 12 o'clock, this old world is gonna reel and rock. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oh, Mary, don't you weep. Just jump to the last one. One of these days in the middle of the night, people gonna rise and make things right. Pharaoh's army got drowned. Oops, really messed it up. Sorry. Oh, crap, I lost that. Are we taping all of this, I hope? Oh, Mary, don't you weep. I'm starting to feel rushed, okay? But anyway, that's another with a message song. Okay, change is going to come. Civil War happens, right? The slaves get freed. It's a moment of emancipation. See the emancipated slave right there. And as soon as the slaves were emancipated, they came up with freedom songs, all right? And, you know, I'm not going to do a freedom for you because I just don't think we have time for it. Would you click one more time? It's a great song, though, and I sing that for my History 102 song. This is a song, of course, that will begin to emerge in usage in the civil rights movement, but actually is born of the of slavery. The only difference is that they would say, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on Jesus. All they did was change one word in the entire song, okay? The rest of it's the same thing. But this will be a song, of course, suggestive of freedom, and I hope you'll join in and sing with me, okay? Well, I woke up this morning with my mind. Heard this? I'm sure you've heard it before. Stayed on freedom. Well, I woke up this morning with my mind. Stayed on freedom. Well, I woke up this morning with my mind. Stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 amen. It's not that hard. Come on, you got to sing with me. This is supposed to be the big closing of the show, okay? So please sing. Please, please, please. I'm begging you. I'm down on my knees. Anyway, okay. So I'm walking on and talking with my mind. Stayed on freedom. Well, I'm a walking and a talking with my mind. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Amen. Well, I'm a singing and I'm playing with my mind. Stayed on freedom. Can't hear you. Stayed on freedom. Hallelujah. 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 Amen. Hallelujah. 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 Amen. Hit it one more time. Slavery never, freedom forever, people, okay? Peace. Thank you for hanging out with me this morning.